I'm going to read some poems from my most recent book, Topsy-Turvy, and then some more recent poems. And but because I'm doing this conversation with Johanna Drucker, I thought I would start with a work which you can read with me. I know you didn't expect it to be right at the beginning, but why not? It's called Poetic Citizenship and Negative Dialectics.
Poetry is best that governs least.
No, it isn't.
Poetry and citizenship are inconsolably incommensurable, conjoined at the heart, but beating time to different drummers.
From time to time.
Aesthetic justice is symbolic and dwells next to, not in, the world of political action.
Give me a break.
The poetics of poetic form is averse to a form of political prose.
In your dreams.
And the kind of poetry I want is precarious and extreme. The kind of citizenship I want is neither.
As if you can have it both ways.
Accessibility is to prose what opacity is to poetry.
As in, a long walk is better than a short pier.
The dollar value of poetry can be calculated as the square root of the sublime times the negative sum of utopia divided by the excess derivative of an originality.
You wish.
The kind of poetry I want questions norms of identity by rocking and roiling. It traffics in error and errancy. It's a querulous query, but that's not the only kind of poetry I want.
You could fool me, buddy.
When language grapples with the unfamiliar or repressed, it will more likely sound strange than familiar.
The strange is pretty familiar to me.
Politics speaks truth to power. Poetry speaks truth to truth.
Poetry is necessarily plural. Its strands are inimical to one another.
Poetry is just as vital when it is refused by public space as when it occupies public space. The question is not why discomforting poetry, to use a phrase of Tanya Foster's, doesn't have a public voice in America today, but why that voice is cast aside.
The question is not, is poetry dead again, but why are you dead to poetry?
Poetry is not an export product of suffering or beauty, solidarity or despair, but a domain of freedom, shrouded in veils, an unextractable aesthetic core.
Poetry is a form of lamentation, not to split cares, an expression of lamentation.
Aesthetic justice turns an otherworldly eye to family, nation, community, and rationality. Poetry so conceived is of the earth, not of the world, and that is how poetry matters in the world.
Aesthetic privilege is a negative market force, an active agent of loss.
Poetry emerges from difficult life in spite of, as much as a result of.
So much depends upon spite.
The promise of a poem, the kind of poetry I want, is that it refuses reality.
But is it good for the Jews?
To be a poetic citizen is not to act as a citizen, but to perform as a poet. But there can be no citizenship without poetry, and even citizenship is symbolic. Citizenship that refuses dialogue with the delirious, the wanton, discomforting possibilities of poetry approaches nativism.
Get off your low horse.
If citizenship is the first language of the Democrat, then poetry is a second language that, out of love and deep need, refuses to obey its mother tongue.
Poetry has no purpose, and that is not its purpose. I feel like with having a co-reader, I should do like we saw it in half. rabbits coming out of hats. This poem is called The Darkness He Called Night. Virtue's a kind of despair, masquerading as care. A bitter current is for virtue sweet. Sublime wine sours its mouth. Snakes eat from its hands. Jackasses obey its whim. Self-nomination papers its path. Method is its M.O., holding tight to a higher love and fervently displayed empathies. Virtue's sword is truth, in love with itself, at odds with others. Celebrating standards it fashions, virtue jams miscreants, shams malcontents, shaming those abjure improvement. The passion of virtue is reprimand. Nothing is more beautiful to virtue than compelling justice and shattering dissent. Slashes in a pan that will never abolish aesthetics. Affect theory. Sorry to be so sorry. Sad to be so sad. Distraught at my distress. Melancholic on account of my melancholy. Depressed to be depressed. Anxious about my anxiety. Happy to be happy. Glad to be glad. Disappointed by disappointment. Amused to be amused. Angry about anger. Indifferent to indifference. Despairing about despair. Lost in my loss. Buzzed to be buzzed. Dumbfounded to be dumbfounded. Hurt by the hurt. Wounded by the wound. Humiliated by the humiliation. Paranoid about paranoia. Miffed to be miffed. Abject in objectification. Unlucky to be so unlucky. Desiring desire. Blankly blank. Ashamed to be ashamed. Ignorant of my ignorance. Guilty feeling guilty. Paralyzed by my paralysis. Embarrassed by my embarrassment. Silenced by my silence. Enabled by my immobility. And ennobled by it as well. Agitated by my agitation. Okay being okay. Mystified to be confused. Inconsolable about being inconsolable. Frightened by my fearfulness. Encouraged by my timidity. This is called A Poet Supreme, and it's a tribute to Cecil Taylor after he died, written for a set of tributes that John Zorn put together for his record label. So this was part of the CD that they issued. And it goes something like this. I've got spasmodic rib. You got oh, Q shun as sensory mode of release, elation, reverberation, recombination, overlay, impulse, propulse, dash, oh, the pudding puddled minded breath turn as woeingly waiting, wow, z jerk as celestial harmonics, harmonic, so Oh, you can hear the vibrations lashing against the dormers. Ich habe einen spontanen Rhythmus. Du hast Günschen als Sensormodus oder Fragaba GLA Action. Über die Atman drehen sich wie Ingli Dorneren, Horen, Honen. Including but limited to dream tea, scream become whip flash wish list woo withheld wisps sprung succession over to Jarn, dare, obster, fluorescent emanations, showered by blooms, beguiled like a gazelle, doink back flew Alps on a cornful. Includio mas now limitado sanhu grito benevale wered pescitado por blue benvindo talvez en flor da dobra. What a fluke! If I could only sing out of temperamental creation is muse, us begins here. Mine head fogged in surreptitious eruptions, scrum picious, marred, smeared in tenebrae, acoustic, tack, itty, nigh unto tempa purring out of man. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un flou? Si je ne faisais que chanter, commence ici dans éruption merveilleuse, emporébèse induite dans le ténébré, tactilité acoustique, inclination, près de la vapeur qui sort de la bouche des gouttes, inclus mais pas limité à calcul lust of interpersonic questions. The making is the receiving, rolling with and against all the what to reveals in reveiling. I apologize for the slight errors that I may have made in interpreting some of the diacritical remarks, but I'm doing the best I can. This is after Mark Twain. It's called Whiskey on Rye. A flailing poet came to the altar Rebbe for advice on how to improve his art Stop cursing God, Rebbe said defiantly. I constantly praise God in my poems, insisted the poet. Stop disparaging your fellow man, said the rabbi, his voice infused with sorrow, contempt, and world weariness. My poems are filled with praise for my fellow human beings, the poet lamented, his head deeply bowed. Show some respect for the non-human world, the Rebbe, now agitated, shouted. My work is second to none in its engagement with nature, the poor poet pleaded. I am sorry, the altar cocker Rebbe told the poet. There is no help. You're like a sinking ship with nothing to throw off. So as you could hear, I'm trying to bring here to LA, I think it's a receptive audience, some of my self-help poems. That one and affect theory. I think really make poetry something psychologically useful. Although I haven't figured out how. But if you have some thoughts about it, please don't let me know. This is called, so now some recent poems. Because this book was completed topsy-turvy 2 years ago. I may come back to a few poems at the end. This one is called Poem Beginning Almost with a Line by Duncan. Often I am permitted to spin, flip, go turvy-top, turning toward unmade places, shadows, sights of last chances in a game of loop-de-loo, falling down on an unyielding ground. Often I recoil from the permissions I've taken, unsanctioned. Want to crawl back to. Well, that's the problem. No idea where. The past, sure, folded fast. The power of heartlessness in the bitter cold of flight frightens more than I care to say or can begin to tell. This is a poem for Tom Lynn called Fixing the Bishop's Nose. It's a long way to the tip of a prairie, a long way to hem and hone, earth's hearth, a hardened heart gobbled by limited term incentives. Act now. The terms of art, loss shoveled over loss with a fine porcelain gaze, with a fine porcelain glaze, or is it glade? The words get confused in a cornucopia of dyspraxia, left for right, but not up for down. Dunces, dances, rock solid, a headlong plank, tailgating to is real until is not. Oh, Zion, sock me a solid, soiled ox, blemish-like totality, prayer shawl in my other pants, coil on overnight. Pathetic fallacy. Never mind there's no hole so deep you don't get banged when you hit bottom, or that the zombies have overtaken the Capitol. I still hear nightingale songs every time I see pigeons nosediving in early morning hail, whose icy spitballs remind me of paradise. This poem is called Animals Are People Too. Animals are people too, or at least they used to be. I get confused as to what you're supposed to say. I wouldn't join a species that had me as a member. Free choice is sacred, so don't let any of those plutocrats tell me what to say here on Earth. It's a tough time for right thinking and left thinking too. Personally, I am bicameral. I use my phone to take pictures even when riding a camel. Just watch the humps and the bumps will take care of themselves. This is an extremely short poem. I say that because it will almost not appear to have been a poem by the time it's finished. So it's one line, and the title is one line. The poem's title is People are the same the world over. I'm sure that we can all get behind that. People are the same the world over. I am not the same as myself. This is called Being in Nothingness, and it goes like this. First the rabbi, then cantor, then synagogue president stand before the Torah and ask on Yom Kippur, stand before the Torah ark on Yom Kippur and profess with piercing cries, echoing the shofar, that they, each one, is nothing in the face of the Almighty. The worshipers surrounding them in the vast temple weep and moan, awed by the pious self-abnegation of their exalted leaders. After a few minutes, the poet errant, standing in the dank corner of the shul reserved for those who have not purchased high holy day tickets, murmurs, loud enough to be heard by the entire assembly, I am nobody, I am nobody, I am no one, I am nothing. The altar cocker shouts back, what a schmuck to have the chutzpah to claim to be nothing. And I have two commentaries on this poem. The first by Norman Fisher, who Scott mentioned, the mutual friend of ours. Norman writes, the poet errant faced the congregation and defiantly proclaimed, I am somebody, I am. The altar cocker replied, sotto voce, what chutzpah for this nobody to say they're somebody. And then also by Pierre, a translation of a poem that's behind this really great Paul Celan poem, Psalm, and the translation is Pierre Joris. So this is Pierre's translation of Celan. Praise be thou, no one. For your sake we want to flower toward you. A nothing we were, we are, we will remain flowering. The nothing, the no one's rose. See, it's really better without the commentary. The poem itself is silly and amusing, and then the commentary makes it seem somehow serious, about something. It really isn't about anything at all. It's about nothing. It's truly a poem about nothing. I think you'd all agree. This is called Malediction, and it's for Habib Tengour, actually related to Pierre Joris, because Pierre's translated Habib, and they did together the North African or Maghrebian poems for the millennium. And this is for Habib's 75th birthday, which is just coming up. My diction's at the glue factory, while I'm all akimbo, what with the state of this and failure of that, addicted to news never was new, just a downward spin of a story heard long ago and can't kick. Something about dead ends just before the roads go public, or meaning one thing and saying two, you know, for both of us, all three. Remember those westerns where they kept saying, we'll head him off at the pass? I keep trying, but it never works. They always beat me to it. Or maybe I went to the wrong pass. Capitalism gaslighted me. This is another one of the self-help series, because I think some of you may also have had this experience. Capitalism gaslighted me. And so did Heidegger and Thomas Jefferson. God too, if truth be told. The verdict is out on my parents, but it's not looking good. And I'm beginning to think I'm gaslighting myself. Idiosyncratic. When was it last I seed you? Was it maybe yesterday? The time she spoils so quirky, like a rooster thwart the hay. When Marge came out to Breezy Point, I almost broke the floor, jumping in plaid pajama, new bought at the general store. A stiff belt and a lousy thud scarce qualifies a cobbled hill. Done broke the gate at that, swore terrible truths that no one got, and splashed my way to all get out. Bitter greens. I'm just doing this in the meantime. Catch as catch could. Memories cloud memories like the day just outside of Yuma. It must have been on Channel 11, $1 million movie, though maybe 9. To gather together, to gather with flowers, to gather stones together, to father sorrow, to remember to gather. My mom will pay you on Venmo. As soon as she gets back from the forest, where she's gone to meditate with the singing Neanderthals, or maybe it's Dragon Man or Tiger Lady. These times sure do press on you, and all you can do is hang in or hang on and wait for the whole goddamn era to blow over. Or is it bow out? This is another in the self-help series. I'm just trying to, be explanatory. People often kind of lose track, and this is just to kind of orient. It's called "You Can't Keep a Sailboat in the Ocean." You see, this is not something I knew. I was talking to somebody, and they made this point. You can't keep a sailboat in the ocean. Useful to know if you're buying a sailboat, because you're right here on the ocean, I think. You can't keep a sailboat in the ocean or a top hat in a storm. But if you play your cards right, you can sleep on a minefield. Nettlesome muse. The birds have never been noisier. They are chirping away like there's no tomorrow. This one is called "Jew is an Other." Or so it sometimes felt. Rimbaud's got nothing on myself, I, or me. I don't even recognize myself in you anymore. I don't recognize even myself in myself. I is many others. This poem is called "What Were You Saying About Althusser Creating a Turn in Marxist Thought?" Barbarism in the morning, socialism most every night. Don't know when to cry in shame or just turn out the light. A change is coming, I feel it in my bones, an ill wind blowing. Time to pack my bags and head for home. Barbarism all morning, socialism in the night. Chopped liver on a matzah will surely make it right. This poem is relating to that in some way, written for W.J. Mitchell. Tom Mitchell edited a section of the Brooklyn Rail where he asked different people to write about Twilight of the Gods, the Nietzsche motif of your old idols. Twilight of the Gods. Idols of summer gone, winter stays. Lost my love in a storm, won't be back this way. Each day's twilight life sits on the shelf next to clutter of bric-a-brac, Lysol cans, rumpled felt, idols of salad days, utopias of youth don't add up to a hill of beans or a ride on a glass bottom boat, idols of times gone by, sting like those hissing green flies, buzz over, buzzkill lingers on. Climate changes, or maybe just catches up. Summer idols gone, winter doesn't stray. Lost my love in a storm, won't be back this way. And this poem is for my friend Ian Bernstein, and it's called Mandelstam, and it has an epigraph from an early Mandelstam poem. On the window panes of eternity, my breath, my warmth has already settled. In my translation with Kenneth Platt, epigraph. I am neither referent nor referee, refugee nor redeemer, projector nor projection, draft nor final cut, neither the one who calls nor the one chosen, anagram nor abstraction. My breath disappears from the window more quickly than it formed. So just a couple more poems. I'll go back to Topsy-Turvy. This is a translation of the Rückert lyric that's best known in the Mahler setting. So if you know this song of Mahler with the Rückert lyric. So this is my adaptation of that lyric. Comes I to this world abandoned, having wasted the time I was handed, till all that's left is the bandage. No matter unnoticed, time passes slowly as dreams become lashes. Still alone, caught in rhyme's ashes, dead to this world's wrong, dwells still I in my song, in every thorn, at every morn. The wreck of hope. Death is the end of all sadness. Storm follows each moment of bliss. Here lies the road to true madness, deeper than locks in abyss. Storm echoes surfeit of gladness. Loneliness lives by its wits. And this is sort of following up on the Mahler. This is a translation of the Hermann Hesse 1911 poem, best known in the setting of Richard Strauss, Near Sleep. Days tired me out. My headlong longing greets starry night like a weary child unleashed. Hand freed of all doing, head forgetting all thinking, all my senses hunger for slumber, and my soul released floats out in boundless flight, spellbound through the night, plunging wildly, at last alive. Song sparrow. Maids, 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 put on your tea, kettle, kettle, kettle. No time to waste. Get out your bass, fiddle, fiddle, fiddle. Young lads, make haste. Dance to your love's riddle, riddle, riddle. Duplexity. If anything I have done cancels what I feel, then put me on a boat without a keel, and I will row myself back to you, whatever else I do. Whatever else I do.